Hi, we are Out of This World Consulting, and we're so excited to share with you today what we've learned about the Stafford Air and Space Museum over the course of the past semester. With that being said, I would like to begin with our executive summary. In order to gain a more thorough understanding of the Stafford Air and Space Museum and your current situation, we performed a comprehensive secondary research report about the museum and its competitors. In addition to performing this research, we conducted a survey and various in-depth interviews to supplement our findings. The primary goal of conducting these interviews was to discover information regarding the key publics and their prior perceptions of the museum, including what they found most important and most interesting. The results provide data which support the findings of the secondary research and in-depth interviews and provide a clear picture of the Stafford Air and Space Museum's current negative and positive aspects. We hope this report may enable you to improve your museum.
To drive our research, our group decided that Stafford Air and Space Museum needs to spread awareness and increase exposure in order to draw in a larger audience. The museum struggles with knowing which audiences to target with its communication strategies, as well as lacks an active social media presence. This situation is extremely important to the museum because though they offer unique experiences and exhibits, many members of their untapped audiences are left unaware of the museum and its features. Though this could be an obstacle for the museum if not changed, it poses the museum with many opportunities for growth as they adapt their communication strategies to better suit their target audiences. Untapped audiences include parents of school-age children, school-age and college students, air and space enthusiasts, and local residents and travelers of the Oklahoma City metropolitan area. Our group suggests focusing on young parents aged 26 to 35 with school-age children in the Oklahoma City metro area as the key public, as they have an active social media presence and are looking for engaging and educational activities to do as a family. In order to reach this public, it is important for Stafford to modernize their messaging to reach this younger audience, work on creating a higher ranking and more competitive search engine optimization of their website, and using competitor museums as a benchmark for reaching out to this audience. During our formative research, we created a SWOT analysis in order to better understand the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats to Stafford. Some of the museum's strengths include having high ratings on travel websites, its prime location on the nostalgic Route 66, the public's renewed interest in space exploration due to privatized space exploration and space-related media, and the Weatherford icon and museum namesake, General Stafford. Weaknesses include a lack of diversity in age, gender, and race within the museum staff, which can make it harder to connect with a diverse audience, having outdated communication methods such as brochures, and a lack of data from members and past visitors. Opportunities that Stafford can capitalize on include targeting travelers from I-40 and Route 66, utilizing the advertising budget to use more modern communication strategies to reach younger and more diverse audiences, highlighting stories and human aspects of the museum through their exhibits, and using data from surveys to analyze visitor behaviors. Threats that the museum should be aware of is how the COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the museum industry, the relatively small visitor base, and the remote location outside of the Oklahoma City metro area.
Next, I'll be talking about our in-depth interview and findings. So in order to gain a better understanding about what different key publics enjoy about the Stafford Air and Space Museum, as well as what they dislike or would like to see added, Out of This World Consulting engaged with 4 different people through in-depth interviews. One of the goals of these interviews was to get more insight into the specific characteristics of key publics, such as their familiarity with the museum, their demographics like age, gender, or profession, and their personal interests. Secondly, the interviews were conducted with the goal of learning the opinions of the key publics on the Stafford Air and Space Museum. This would include what they enjoy about it, what they dislike about it, what they would like to see added, or what they think is perhaps unnecessary. Through these interviews, one of the discoveries made were trends among the interviewees. This included both commonalities in the characteristics of the key publics, as well as commonalities in their answers relating to what they think about the Stafford Air and Space Museum. One of these commonalities was the interviewees' love of history and the connection that they believe that museums can make to history. And this was cited as one of the most popular answers for what they'd like to see at the Stafford Air and Space Museum. The second discovery made through the interviews was what connected the key publics to the topics of aerospace and aviation. This connection also happened to be a trend in some cases, with family ties to those with experience in aviation being a common reason for their interest in the topic.
Another method that we used in order to find out more information from the public about your museum was to conduct a survey. This survey helped us to learn about the relationship between interest and familiarity with the willingness to travel to the museum. In addition, we learned about the relationship between social media usage and the awareness of your museum. And lastly, we learned about the relationship between gender and the likelihood to visit the museum. These three key elements really helped us to form our in-depth interviews, which preceded the survey.
The next section we have is the social media audit. It is intended to gain data about both similar and competing museums. More specifically, we plan to use this data to make comparisons between the social media platforms of the Stafford Air and Space Museum. With this information, we will be able to understand how the Stafford Air and Space Museum presence compares with other museums' media presence and create a plan for improvement for the museum. We've observed their Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube for the audit to discover their content and strategy engagements and websites. To get a clearer look at these key points, we've audited an overview of their competitors, the Tulsa Air and Space Museum and the Science Museum, Oklahoma. During the audit, we found that they have a lot in common with their competitors. However, there is a lot of work that should be done in order to maintain a great overall look on their social media platforms. The Tulsa Air and Space Museum attracts most of their audience and engages on Facebook more than their other social media accounts. They aren't as active on Twitter and YouTube as much, just like the Stafford Air and Space Museum. Their website looks well and seems to be easy to navigate, but the photos don't look quite up to date, nor are there any photos of the exhibit to give their audience a glance of what their experience will be like. For their second competitor, we've discovered that the Science Museum of Oklahoma happens to be their biggest competitor. They have a much larger following on social media platforms than the Stafford Air and Space Museum. We've audited their website, which seems to be up to date with COVID precautions. This is something that we've noticed that the other websites didn't have, which is an important factor to have on your website during this time. They engage with their audience quite frequently by retweeting their tweets, posting once a day on Instagram and Facebook, and posting relevant content to stay up to date with all of the new things at the museum. Stafford Air and Space Museum seems to get the most attention on their Facebook account, and their Instagram account really isn't much up to date. We believe that if the museum uses their platforms to engage and inform their audience with more up-to-date information about what they offer, they could bring more attention to the museum. It's obvious that the audit proves that staying up to date and engaging with their audience on a daily basis will help increase the museum's attraction. We believe that the Stafford Air and Space Museum could take these tactics to incorporate into their daily routine to get a positive outcome in the near future.
Out of This World Consulting conducted a survey and in-depth interviews to search for attitudes and perception and awareness about Stafford Air and Space. We found three interesting parts that we would like to discuss with you today. The first is the awareness of General Thomas Stafford. So while not many people that took our survey were aware of General Thomas Stafford, those who were aware were more likely to travel 30 minutes to an hour to visit the museum. This implies that Thomas Stafford is a draw to the museum for people who know about him. Next, we found that those with high interests in topics about air and space were more willing to travel 30 minutes to an hour to visit the museum. Many of the in-depth interview participants expressed specific interest in World War I and World War II aircraft being on display. Some of the interview participants said they would be more willing to travel further if they saw something they could not see anywhere else, like a restored military plane, or were able to interact with cool technology like virtual reality. From the interview respondents, there was also a common theme of family interest in air and space. This can imply that the museum can aim to focus messaging on families as a whole and bring families to the museum to show them different interesting exhibits and things that appeal to all different ages of people. There was also no difference in interest in space exploration between current members and non-members. So communication tactics about new exhibits do not have to differ between members and non-members. Comparing gender, survey results showed that men were more likely to be interested in air and space. This can imply that men may be more likely to travel 30 minutes to an hour to visit the museum. And finally, we saw a correlation between frequent Facebook users and awareness about the museum. So it's important to note that understanding this correlation, it's important to note the frequency of posting on Stafford Air and Space's Facebook page. More frequent posts would garner more awareness. Interview respondents also shared the aviation community utilizes Facebook to talk about upcoming events and different facts and things like that. So each aviation organization has their own Facebook page. The air and space community can also help spread the word about Stafford Air and Space if they are able to get into this audience.
So this next section talks about the suggestions we have for the Stafford Air and Space Museum. These are based on our research findings and the data we've analyzed. The first suggestion we have for the museum is to definitely know who your audience is, know what messages you want to send out to the individual key publics and how you talk to them. So for the museum, we've narrowed it down to 3 different key publics, which are students in Oklahoma, travelers, and parents. And so each individual group that you are trying to target have different ways that they interact with, social media and how they view things, so that you need to tailor messages to each of those different platforms in order to create the most effective brand awareness surrounding that. So definitely we want to narrow down your audience and also tailor each individual message that you send out to those specific groups. The second suggestion we have is to expand your social media platforms compared to your competitors and other air and space museums that people have visited. Your social media lacks in content and just visibility online. Social media is a great way to tap into new visitors, potential clients, and things like that. So definitely expanding on social media, having a hashtag like hashtag my trip to Stafford will definitely increase the brand awareness and people want to click on it. And of course, you don't have to be active on more platforms. So for example, if you just want to be active on Facebook and Twitter, that's okay. Make sure your content has a meaning and has a target, and make sure you're meeting that target when you're talking to your key publics. The third suggestion is to basically revamp your website. People that we've talked to have said your website's difficult to navigate right now, and just a redesign to make it easy to get information about the museum. And also you want to create your own content pertaining to the museum. So for example, you can write some blog post about an article, or not an article, a new exhibit at the museum, or different types of exhibits at the museum. And that'll definitely give face to your brand. And when people read these blogs, they're not going to a different website or straying away from the Stafford Air and Space Museum. They're staying on your website and looking at your content that you're creating. So a revamp of the website is definitely a must to make it easier to navigate and more of your own content creation. The fourth suggestion would be to advertise. A couple of people you interviewed during the interview process, they stated that a flashy billboard saying like what the museum offers would be really cool for travelers on I-40. But another key thing you could do is advertise through social media. You can create targeted ads for your key publics. On Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, you can promote posts. So that would be a way to tap into new demographics and new visitors for your museum, just to get the word out of the Stafford Air and Space Museum. The next one goes hand in hand with advertising, is you want to build a solid work culture. That means you want your employees to have a positive outlook on the museum. You want them to be positively talking about the museum and also being out in the community and positively talking about the museum to potential visitors in the community of Weatherford. So when your employees are out talking to people and they're saying good things about what the museum brings and potential things the museum will bring to the museum, like new exhibits and things like that, you'll pique an interest and definitely expand your following and your brand awareness. And the final suggestion we have for the museum is, of course, in a post-COVID world, is virtual reality exhibits. I think there's a huge growing market for virtual reality. So one person we interviewed suggested that you have like a virtual reality flight simulation or a rocket launch so people could put on a headset and just live like they're a pilot or an astronaut maneuvering a spacecraft. And I think that'd be a really cool campaign idea to have behind it. You could create a whole exhibit for the virtual reality, roll it out on social media, get people talking about it, and potentially get new visitors to your museum. So with that being said, if you implement most of these suggestions, I think overall you will narrow down your target audience and get more of those people to come into your museum. So you won't be like trying to get a whole pool of people to come to your museum that you're just throwing out messages and hoping they come. You'll know exactly who you're targeting. You'll put out the message and they'll come to you. You'll expand on more of those groups. You'll have more of a social media presence so you can pitch ideas to journalists to get out into magazines and things like that of like travel ideas in Oklahoma and just up your brand awareness and your place in Oklahoma travel destinations. You want to create a work environment where people are positively talking about the museum, not only to each other, but to other people. And it could be all back behind a new virtual reality experience to the museum.